She is a monster, nearly 8 million kilograms of steel, 115 metres long, capable of carrying a dozen missiles and close to 30 torpedoes.
There's a new force ruling the deep, and it's already making rival navies lose sleep. America's newest submarine is enormous, but raw size isn't what makes it a threat. What truly unsettles people is how completely it can vanish. It was designed to move through the ocean as if it was never there, all while carrying enough destructive power to reshape the world. And here's the kicker: SSNX, the Navy's next-generation attack submarine, is right around the corner. This is the story of the sub sitting at the heart of American defense. The most terrifying submarine in the water isn't the one charging toward a battle, it's the one that can go silent, stay alive, and still hold a nation's fate in its hands. That's the fear the Columbia-class was built on. It wasn't designed to flex military muscle. It was designed to make sure no enemy can ever be confident that the United States has lost its final say. Even if the absolute worst came to pass, this submarine exists to ensure a response is still lurking somewhere beneath the ocean's surface. To really grasp why that matters, you need to understand how the Navy uses its submarines differently. Some are attack boats, hunters built to track, strike, and handle a wide range of missions. Others are cruise missile boats loaded with conventional firepower. Then there's the SSBN, which stands for Ballistic Missile Submarine. This is a boat with one purpose: carry long-range nuclear missiles and stay hidden long enough that any enemy thinks twice before acting. That's exactly where Columbia operates. It's not chasing ships for glory. It's about surviving, staying invisible, and making sure no one can ever risk wiping out America's nuclear response in a single strike. These boats are commonly called boomers, and the Navy considers them the most survivable piece of America's sea-based nuclear force. Right now, the backbone of that force is the Ohio-class. The Navy runs 14 of those boats, originally purchased between fiscal years 1977 and 1991, entering service from 1984 through 1997. They were initially built for a 30-year life, later stretched to 42 years, with each boat requiring a major midlife refueling overhaul along the way. But time is catching up. The first of those 14 boats hits the end of its 42-year lifespan in 2027. After that, the rest start retiring at roughly one per year until 2040. This isn't some side project. It's a race against a ticking clock. And that's exactly why Columbia has become the Navy's single highest priority. The mission is straightforward and unforgiving. The United States wants a hidden force at sea constantly. Not most of the time, not when the schedule cooperates, but always. If that force begins to shrink before replacement boats are ready, the whole system starts feeling uncertain. That's precisely what this class is meant to stop. The Navy has even explored extending the lives of some Ohio boats as a contingency, because any serious delay now puts direct pressure on this mission. Then there's the boat itself. Columbia is massive, around 560 feet long, 43 feet wide, and roughly 20,800 long tons when submerged. The Navy calls it the largest, most capable, and most advanced submarine the country has ever produced. This isn't just another hull quietly slipping into the fleet, it's a machine built at a national scale, the kind of vessel that forces you to think beyond a single ship and a single launch. It's meant to be part of a force that carries one of the most serious responsibilities any military system can hold, and it's built to last for decades. This is also not a one-boat story. The Navy plans a class of 12. The first was purchased in fiscal year 2021, the second followed in 2024, and the third is planned for fiscal year 2026. From there, the goal is one boat per year in a steady rhythm. The lead vessel is named the District of Columbia, and the first boats are already under construction. The Navy says this class is designed to keep the sea-based nuclear deterrent running into the 2080s, far beyond the lifespans of the boats it's replacing today. The money behind it signals just how serious Washington is. The first boat's procurement cost came in at roughly $15.2 billion. The second was around $9.3 billion. The total estimated cost for all 12 boats sits at approximately $126.4 billion. One estimate pegged the first boat alone at around $18.1 billion in 2024 dollars, about $2 billion higher than the Navy's own figure in those same dollars. However you look at it, the message is clear. The United States is spending staggering amounts to keep a hidden strike force permanently at sea. That price tag is part of why Congress created a separate national sea-based deterrence fund specifically for this program. The reasoning was simple. Columbia is so expensive and so critical that lawmakers didn't want it swallowing everything else in the Navy's shipbuilding budget without special tools to absorb the impact. That alone tells you something important. This class isn't treated like a normal ship order, it's treated like a national necessity, something so central to nuclear deterrence that the government built entirely separate funding rules around it. When a submarine program starts bending the federal budget around itself, you're no longer looking at a routine warship story. That same pressure shows up in the shipyards, and that's where the real stress behind the program becomes visible. Columbia is being built by General Dynamics Electric Boat, with HII Newport News as the main partner. Large sections are constructed in different locations before being brought together, already a massive logistical challenge. But the harder problem is that those same yards and suppliers are simultaneously trying to keep Virginia-class attack submarine production running. So the question isn't just whether America can design a submarine like Columbia. The question is whether the country's entire submarine building network can carry this much weight at once. Congress has been keeping a close eye on this because Columbia's demands can squeeze the very same shipyards and supply chains needed for other undersea programs, and that pressure is very real. The latest budget data puts the delay for the first Columbia boat at around 17 months. Earlier government reviews suggested the lead boat could slip into a delivery window anywhere from October 2028 to February 2029, which would pile even more pressure on getting the first patrol done on time. That matters because the Navy says Columbia must be ready for patrol no later than October 2030, a date directly tied to the rate at which Ohio-class boats are reaching the end of their lives. The Ohio-class boat's Columbia is replacing averaged about 77 days at sea, followed by 35 days in port for upkeep. Each boat runs on 2 full crews, called Blue and Gold, that rotate in and out. One crew takes the boat out while the other resets, trains, and prepares to take it back. That system keeps the submarine in the game more consistently. The whole point is having a hidden boat available when it's needed, over and over, without the entire force going stale. Rivals don't need to know exactly where it is. They only need to know they can't guarantee it's gone. That uncertainty alone is enough to reshape military strategies, war games, and political decisions before a single missile ever leaves a tube. And that's just the mission. The deeper fear is how Columbia was engineered to stay hidden long enough to carry that mission out. The tech that makes Columbia so scary. Almost every significant design choice inside Columbia was made to solve the same set of hard problems simultaneously. It has to stay effective for decades, it has to remain nearly impossible to detect, and it has to carry enough real firepower that none of this can be dismissed as just expensive metal in the ocean. That's why Columbia isn't simply an Ohio with a fresh coat of paint, it's a complete redesign. The mission stays the same, but the Navy changed the things that determine whether this type of submarine can still work in a much more demanding future. The shape changed, the tail changed, the propulsion system changed, the missile section changed. Even the way reactor life was planned changed. Columbia was built to eliminate old bottlenecks, reduce long periods of downtime, and remain a genuine threat deep into the century rather than aging into one massive maintenance headache. Start with the element that changes the entire rhythm of the class: time. Columbia is built for a 42-year service life, and its reactor fuel is designed to last that full duration. In plain terms, the boat is being built so it never needs the kind of massive midlife nuclear refueling that Ohio boats required. That's a bigger deal than most people realize. A refueling overhaul isn't a quick yard visit. It can keep a submarine out of service for years. The new reactor core is designed to eliminate that problem entirely. Columbia will still need a major midlife overhaul, but not one that requires tearing the whole ship open to swap reactor fuel. That single choice changes how frequently the class can be deployed, how many boats the Navy actually needs, and how much time is lost with a submarine stuck in heavy maintenance instead of doing its job. The government's own budget documents connect that life of ship reactor core to more than $40 billion in savings because 12 Columbia boats are expected to accomplish what once required 14 Ohios. Then there's the electric drive system. That phrase might sound dry, but it's critically important because submarines live or die based on what the ocean can hear. On older configurations, power moved through a more direct mechanical path. Columbia works differently. It uses an electric drive propulsion system that's expected to run significantly quieter than the mechanical drive setups used on earlier U.S. submarines. That's an enormous advantage. Underwater, raw power isn't enough. If the way your boat moves generates a recognizable sound signature, you're helping the enemy every second you're in the water. Columbia's propulsion system was specifically built to reduce that risk. The goal wasn't just to push a massive submarine through the water, the goal was to move it in a way that gives away as little as possible. This isn't merely an engineering upgrade, it's one of the clearest public signals that the Navy treated stealth as a foundational requirement from day one, not something to be patched in later. The tale tells the same story. Columbia uses an X-stern configuration, meaning the rear control surfaces are arranged in an X shape rather than the traditional plus-sign layout used on the Ohio class. On paper, that might sound like a minor visual tweak. It isn't. When the Navy redesigns the tail of its next strategic submarine from the ground up, it's telling you this wasn't built by tracing over the old blueprint. The control logic at the stern was also reworked, and that matters because the stern is where much of a submarine's movement, handling, and control come together. The redesign went deep. This wasn't a case of keeping the old body and swapping a few components. The Navy was willing to rethink even the shape and feel of the boat's handling to get the balance it was looking for. The missile section may be the clearest example of how Columbia was built to be smarter, not just bigger. Columbia carries 16 ballistic missile tubes compared to the 20 usable tubes on an Ohio today. So yes, the new boat carries fewer. But that wasn't a careless reduction. It came after years of analysis inside the Pentagon, the Navy, and U.S. Strategic Command. The tube count was debated intensely because going from 20 usable tubes to 16 sounds like a step backward. In the end, leadership concluded that 16 still gets the job done. Their argument was simple. What matters isn't winning a numbers contest on paper. What matters is whether the full force can complete the mission with enough boats, enough flexibility, enough survivability, and enough real firepower. The Navy's position was that 16 tubes sized the ship appropriately for the work it would actually do. And that decision did more than save space. It changed the rest of the submarine. Dropping from 20 tubes to 16 allowed the Navy to reduce the propulsion power required. In practical terms, fewer tubes helped make room for a smaller reactor plant and allowed designers to incorporate more proven existing components instead of having to invent everything from scratch. Because in a submarine, no single decision ever stays contained. Change the missile load and you change the required size, the required power, the reactor design, and which parts can be reused. Columbia's tubes maintain the same 87-inch diameter as Ohio's, with enough length for the Trident D5 missile. So the Navy didn't shrink the system by developing a smaller strategic missile for a more compact boat. It kept the same large missile and designed the submarine around a lower but still decisive number of full-size launch tubes. That brings us to the missile itself. Columbia is built around the Trident II D5 life extension missile, commonly shortened to D5LE. This isn't some rushed new weapon being hurried onto a brand new platform. The D5 has been in service since the 1990s. The life-extended version entered the fleet in early 2017 and was designed to remain in service through the 2040s. When older Ohio boats eventually retire, their refurbished D5 missiles will be transferred to Columbia boats. In other words, the submarine is new, but the missile family it carries is already proven, tested extensively, and deeply embedded in the sea-based nuclear force. The Navy says the D5 can carry multiple warheads and fly more than 4,000 nautical miles, well over 4,500 regular miles, making the ocean feel far smaller than it looks on any map. And as of the test series announced in September 2025, the D5 program had recorded 197 successful flight test launches. The missile section becomes even more interesting when you zoom out. Columbia doesn't stand alone here. Its missile compartment is connected to Britain's future Dreadnought class through what's called the Common Missile Compartment, or CMC, the middle section of the submarine where the launch tubes sit. The US and UK are working from the same core compartment design. Britain's Dreadnought boats are configured with 12 missile tubes, though current UK plans call for 8 D5 missiles to be carried operationally. The compartment was designed with national differences in mind, and Britain contributed to funding the design, particularly in the early stages. That means Columbia isn't just an American submarine story. It sits inside a larger Allied nuclear framework built on shared design work, a common missile family, and long-standing technical cooperation between the two countries, which makes the whole class feel even more significant. Now, the part everyone really wants to know, how a submarine this large is supposed to stay invisible. The simplest way to understand it is to remember there are two basic methods for detecting something underwater. One is active sonar. Send out a sound pulse and wait for the echo. The other is passive sonar. Stay quiet and just listen for the target's own noise. Columbia's design choices are all aimed at making both of those approaches harder to pull off. If someone sends a ping, the submarine doesn't want to return a clean, readable echo. If someone just listens, the submarine doesn't want to sound like a machine churning through the water. These boats are described as virtually undetectable on patrol, and that doesn't mean magic. It means the entire design is built around eliminating the clues the ocean can carry. Columbia's stealth story is really a story about reducing signatures. Less sound out, less sound reflected back, less to hear, less to track. The electric drive plays a role here, but it isn't working alone. Navy maintenance documentation openly discusses submarines using damping systems and acoustic tiles, sound control layers and hull coverings designed to absorb and suppress noise. The exact formula isn't public and it doesn't need to be. The logic is clear enough. If you want a strategic submarine to remain hidden, you design to stop vibration from escaping the hull, you make it less likely to hand back a clean sonar echo, and you work to keep stray sounds from leaking into the water in the first place. Columbia is the boat built to wait, to stay hidden, and to hold the line. The next submarine the Navy wants is built for something completely different, to chase, strike, and dominate the undersea battle on its own terms. SSNX, the Navy's next hunter. This is where the Navy starts demanding more. More speed, more weapons capacity, more reach, more flexibility, more ways to stay ahead in waters that are growing more crowded and more dangerous by the year. SSNX isn't just the next item on a procurement list. It's the Navy saying the next undersea fight will require capabilities that don't yet exist in the fleet. And the timing isn't comfortable. At the start of fiscal year 2026, the U.S. attack submarine force stood at 49 boats, 20 Los Angeles-class, 3 Seawolf-class, and 26 Virginia-class. That sounds like a solid number until you trace where things are headed. The force is expected to dip in the late 2020s and early 2030s because too few attack submarines were purchased in the 1990s following the Cold War. Under current Navy plans, the force bottoms out at 47 boats in fiscal year 2030 before beginning to climb again. So the Navy is trying to build for the future while managing a fleet that's going to feel thinner before it feels stronger. That pressure hangs directly over the SSNX. To understand why the Navy wants something beyond what it currently has, you have to look at Virginia first. Not because Virginia is weak, but because it's actually quite impressive. The classic periscope is gone, replaced by two photonics masts equipped with digital cameras capable of capturing both standard and infrared imagery. That change freed up the control room from its traditional fixed position, allowing it to be relocated one deck lower, giving commanders more space and a better layout. The torpedo room can be reconfigured for special operations equipment and personnel. There's also a large lockout trunk built in for divers. These aren't minor tweaks. They're the kind of changes that made Virginia feel like a genuine leap forward rather than a routine replacement. The weapons layout followed the same trend. Early Virginia boats had 12 individual launch tubes in the bow. Later boats replaced those with two large 87-inch Virginia payload tubes, each capable of launching 6 Tomahawk missiles. Then came the Virginia payload module, an entirely new hull section adding 4 more large tubes, each carrying 7 Tomahawks for an additional 28 missiles. With that module installed, the boat grows from 377 feet to 461 feet, and submerged weight rises from roughly 7,800 tons to about 10,200 tons. That's a substantial jump. So when people talk about the future as if the Navy is starting from zero, they're missing the point. The baseline is already advanced. SSNX is being measured against a boat that already moved the bar significantly. But that's exactly what makes SSNX so telling. If the Navy is still asking for an entirely new class after all of that, it's saying something important. It's saying Virginia, for all its strengths, isn't the final answer for the next phase of undersea warfare. SSNX is aimed squarely at the growing challenge from rivals competing for dominance below the surface. The Navy isn't asking for a refreshed Virginia. It says SSNX needs to bring greater speed, more horizontal payload capacity, improved acoustic signatures, greater adaptability against future threats, and higher operational availability. Strip away the technical language and the message is simple. The Navy wants a faster, heavier, harder-to-detect attack boat that can stay relevant longer and operate in a far more contested ocean. Navy officials have said they want SSNX to combine the speed and payload capacity of the Seawolf class with the quieting technology and sensor capabilities of the Virginia class, along with the operational availability principles learned from designing Columbia. That tells you SSNX isn't being pitched as some arbitrary new hull. It's being shaped as a best-of-all-worlds attack submarine, as fast as the most aggressive boat the Navy ever fielded, as quiet and capable as its current frontline platform, and planned from the start to spend less of its service life stuck in maintenance. That is an extremely ambitious target. An ambition like that usually means two things at once: a more dangerous platform and a harder, more expensive program to manage. Seawolf is the clearest shadow hanging over this effort. Those boats are larger and more heavily armed than the Los Angeles class, featuring 8 30-inch torpedo tubes and the ability to carry 50 torpedoes or cruise missiles. The first 2 Seawolf boats are 353 feet long and around 9,138 tons submerged. The third, USS Jimmy Carter, is even longer at 453 feet due to an additional multi-mission hull section. Seawolf was originally meant to be a class of around 30 boats. Only 3 were ever built. The Cold War ended, budget shifted, and the program was cut short, but the design never lost its reputation. When Navy leaders point back to Seawolf for speed and firepower, they're pointing to one of the most capable attack submarine concepts the country ever funded. So SSNX doesn't feel like a quiet follow-on. It feels like the Navy reaching back for one of its most aggressive design philosophies and trying to bring that spirit into a new era. Estimated submerged displacement for SSNX is around 10,100 tons, which would make it larger than the original Virginia and slightly larger than the original Seawolf. Average cost per boat is estimated at approximately $7.1 billion. This isn't a modest step forward or a budget-friendly cleanup act. It's a very large, very expensive attack submarine effort aimed at top-tier competition, and that price tag tells you the Navy is preparing for a harder class of fight ahead, one serious enough to justify building something this ambitious. The schedule adds yet another layer of tension. The first SSNX was originally planned for fiscal year 2035. Then the Navy's fiscal year 2025 budget pushed that first procurement back to fiscal year 2040, citing budget constraints. The fiscal year 2026 budget then requested $622.8 million for SSNX development. There's one more element that makes SSNX feel like a genuine next chapter rather than just the next hull, and that's what happens outside the boat. SSNX will be designed to operate alongside and coordinate with a broader network of remote systems and sensors. That matters because it points toward a future where the submarine doesn't have to put itself at risk for every mission. Some of the listening, scouting, and reconnaissance work can be pushed outward to unmanned systems. The Navy is already moving in that direction. In late 2023, it accepted delivery of its first Orca extra-large unmanned undersea vehicle, an unmanned diesel-electric submarine built for long-range operations with interchangeable payloads. That doesn't mean SSNX will be some sci-fi drone carrier with swarms of robotic submarines at its command. But it does mean the Navy is already building the kind of external assets that make a future attack submarine something more than a single set of eyes and ears. That's where SSNX starts to feel genuinely unsettling. A faster boat is dangerous. A bigger weapon load is dangerous. Better stealth is dangerous. But a boat that can also extend the fight through remote systems and distributed sensors stretches the battlefield outward in ways that are harder to counter. More things listening, more things scouting, more ways to build a comprehensive picture of what's happening beneath the surface without forcing the main submarine to take every risk itself. That's the smarter fear here. And that's where this story is headed.